Hello and welcome to this afternoon's industry session, Short Films, Activist Films with Philip Ilson. My name's Julia Andrews Clifford and I am the Young Film Programmers Manager for Film Hub South East. And I'm a cis woman and I prefer the pronouns she, her. And I'm white and middle-aged and I'm in a room with paintbrushes and books behind me. And it is my pleasure to host today's session. The session is going to run where we have half an hour questions with me and then half an hour questions over to you. And if you would like to access live captioning, you can go to the bottom of the screen and access it there, or you can find it in the chat. There should be a link to it there. But just to say, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. We thought that this topic would be close to the hearts of lots of young film programmers because many of you are, of course, makers as well as curators. So thanks for tuning in. It's great to have you and we hope you're doing all right in lockdown, watching lots of short films, and maybe that you joined Philip's London Short Film Festival last week. It is such a pleasure to welcome Philip. Hello, thanks for coming.
Hey, yeah, all right.
Hello, and It's really fun also to see Philip in his natural habitat as a curator with all of those records behind you, because obviously music as well as film is your passion. So it's really fabulous to have you, and you must be exhausted from last week. So we are really grateful and lucky to have you. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thanks.
So to introduce Philip, I actually met Philip 20 years ago when we were both young film programmers, and we were at the Co-op Film Festival on a selection weekend, watching hundreds of short films and deciding which ones would make it through to the festival. And since then, I think probably you founded the London Short Film Festival a couple of years after that.
That's right.
You have, Philip has been, he co-founded and is the director of the London Short Film Festival. He also is the senior short film programmer for BFI London Film Festival, has programmed short films for Branchage Festival in Jersey, for Cork Film Festival, East End Film Festival. He's been a programmer for Curzon Soho. And so you really have sort of become Mr. Short Film. I don't know how you'd feel about that as an introduction, but I'd just like to start by maybe asking you to tell us a little bit about the evolution of the London Short Film Festival. Sure. And how it began and where it is today.
Okay, yeah, sure. So yeah, my name is Philip Ilson. I'm the artistic director of London Short Film Festival. I'm a he and cis white male. So yeah, the London Short Film Festival just happened last week. It was its 18th edition, which is crazy that it seems to have gone so quickly since 2004 when the festival started. Also, it was obviously, considering the situation that we're in at the moment, it was the first online edition. We did have some cinema screenings planned just as a sort of a bit of a backup, because we thought we would probably be able to do some cinema screenings, but of course we went back into the major lockdown before Christmas, and looks like we're not going to be out of that till March now. So we hope to reschedule those screenings at some of our regular venues, but it didn't really matter because everything was going to be online anyway. We'd planned to do the whole festival online, so it wasn't like we had to change things at the last minute. We did have some outdoor screenings planned, which weren't available to watch online, but that's going to go ahead anyway. And as I said, sort of in March time. So yeah, did you just want to go back? Should I go back to the beginning?
Yeah, take us back to the start, because obviously 18 years for any business is a pretty impressive record to keep going. And now you're BAFTA accredited, and you know, I don't know what kind of accolades you feel, but it feels to me that you're one of the most high-profile short film festivals in the UK, certainly, and maybe Europe. So yeah, just really taking us back to your entrepreneurship to start that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was entrepreneurship. I'm not really a very, I mean, you know, the fact that the festival survived for so long is a bit of amazing, because I'm not really a business person. And you know, there was times when it was ready to fold and not continue anymore. But I've worked with some really good people alongside me over those years who have managed to sort of make it more sustainable. Certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, when it looked like it had to basically stop, for various, because of having no funding, having no money, etc., etc. I did work with a amazing business partner, Sarah Chorley, who I knew from Shooting People, and she came on board and sort of really developed the business side of the festival. And she left last year, but that's now being continued with a new director, Amanda Parker. But going back to the start, yeah, I mean, it kind of grew out of a film club that I was running back in the 90s. I'd started a film club with a friend of mine that I'd been at school with. I grew up in London, so you know, we had access to quite a good sort of independent film scene in London. You know, at quite a young age, a friend's dad at school took us to the National Film Theatre, the BFI South Bank as it is now, to see some films when we were teenagers. And then I discovered all these other independent cinema in London and all these other venues that showed film, many of which are no longer with us, like the Scala in King's Cross. And you know, there's the Ritzy in Brixton, which is now part of Picture House. But there was loads of amazing places to see films. And yeah, so discovering film that way, really, because I hadn't had any film training. I'd left school at 18. I didn't go on to university. My friend that I started the film club with, he was someone that did go on to do graphics at Middlesex, but we were making films together. We were shooting, you know, friends' music videos, low budget films on our dad's Super 8 cameras or video cameras. And we wanted somewhere, we didn't know anything about festivals or screen, you know, I mean, you don't, no one would tell you that these things exist. I didn't know what a film festival was, but just through Time Out magazine, which was once a very great London listings magazine for people that don't, I don't think, does it even exist? No, it doesn't. It does online, doesn't it?
Is it just
Time Out.
online now?
I think so. They would list in their cinema section places you could go and see, like film clubs. And there was one that we went to, which was in Camberwell, above a pub called Exploding Cinema. And you turned up and basically they would just show short films. It wouldn't be curated. You could turn up with your film, you could show it there. And they were such good fun. They were such great events. With a compare, you could buy your drink, you know, you could, they'd sometimes have some live music on. And they were really inspirational at sort of opening doors of what could be possible. And me and Tim and my friend started our own film club, which we called the Halloween Society. And there was quite a lot of other clubs at that time kicking off as well, these independent film clubs around London. It had no connection to the BFI, to funded organised cinemas. All this was very alternative and very underground. And there was, I think, it was being in the right place at the right time. There was all these film clubs, and then we all got together and decided to hold an underground film festival that was called Volcano, where we all came together over the 1 week of the year and put on our own specific events. So we were using a venue in Leicester Square, weirdly enough. I mean, it's so strange when I think back to the fact that these spaces were available at that time. But you probably know the Prince Charles Cinema, but next door to the Prince Charles Cinema, there's a church called Notre Dame, and underneath there's a church hall. And we just wandered in there one day and said, can we hire this hall? And they said yes. And we were there running film nights for 4 or 5 years, monthly, showing short films, having live bands, having comedy, having visual stuff, DJs. The venue is still there. They changed their name to Leicester Square Theatre, and I think it's just a standard theatre now. But having that space so centrally to do this was incredible. And then, I don't know. And then, I mean, also at the time, I was temping. I was doing temp jobs around London just to earn money. And I'd ended up through the temp agency getting a job at the British Council Films Department, just in an admin role. And that kind of came along at the right place, right time as well. you know, it was really exciting to all of a sudden start to learn about what film festivals were and international film festivals, and starting to see a lot of short films that were coming through the British Council to go out to film festivals.
Right.
And that really helped with building the film club as well. And then in 2000, I left the British Council to try and go freelance. Probably didn't do very well because again, I just didn't really know the climate or really know how to negotiate the industry. But I'd also, through my temping days, met a really good friend, Kate Taylor, who came on board with me to sort of help run events and help, because Tim by that time had kind of moved on to other jobs. And then, yeah, I don't know, starting the film festival was a weird one. I'd been doing some stuff at the ICA, just some club nights with music and DJs and visuals. And I think it was Jane Giles, who was head of cinema at the ICA at the time, said, oh, why don't you run some short film nights in the cinema here? Because we don't really do that here. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. And then we did about 6 months of monthly short film nights. And then out of that, I don't know, it was just another discussion where we said, why don't we just start this as a film festival? So we kept the name of Halloween. So it was called Halloween Short Film Festival for the first few years, mainly because just calling yourself London Short Film Festival when no one really knew who you were or what, it was a brand new venture. It felt a little bit too bigger name for its boots, if you see what I mean. But then the Halloween name was confusing people after 3 or 4 years, as you understand it would, because we weren't a horror film festival. We weren't in October. We were in January. So we just did a quick switch and started calling it London Short Film Festival. And then after that, I started doing bits of freelancing at other festivals. So very heavily involved in East End Film Festival for a while, which is also sadly no longer with us. Very heavily involved in helping to set up this big film festival in Jersey. You mentioned that, the Branchage one, which is also no longer with us. And that, yeah, so that was amazing to branch out and do those other kind of festivals and those other kind of events, because all these festivals were crossing over not only into short film but into feature films, into music events and live music and club nights. And then yeah, those kind of came to an end, and then that's when the London Short Film Festival was sort of getting bigger every year and becoming much more of a sort of full-time job. But then around about that time, I also got the programming job at the BFI London Film Festival, which I've been doing about 8 years, I think. Actually, probably more than that now. I lose track of time.
So just to say a little bit in there, because it's really fascinating. I mean, I thought you might have been a maker. And so, you know, you started out as a filmmaker.
Oh, yeah, but no. I mean, these were terrible films.
Well, that's how everyone starts.
Yeah, I didn't go beyond. I didn't go from making terrible films to making good films. I just made terrible films and went to the next stage. I don't know. Weirdly, we actually did a screening of them at London Short Film Festival about 4 or 5 years ago. My friend Tim, who I was making the stuff with, he lives in Oslo now with his partner, and he came back over and we did a screening at the ICA, and it was quite weird to see them on the big screen and, you know, sort of talk about them. They had a charm. Yeah, they definitely had a charm of the style, and as I said, we did some music videos and stuff. But yeah, I never really wanted to be a filmmaker, I don't think. I mean, that was the thing. I didn't go to university, and I never really knew what I wanted to do other than doing something within the arts, but not having any training and not having any connections to the arts or whatever. You just sort of try and flounder around trying to, you know, I did photography for a bit, didn't really have much success at that. I was in bands, which, you know, in London, indie bands playing, you know, sort of indie venues like the Bull and Gate and other places. I did a lot of visuals for live bands as well. Actually, I suppose that moves into filmmaking, but I was doing a lot of slides and loops and things for live gigs for friends' bands, and one of them became quite big in the sort of mid-90s, and we toured with that, with projectors, and you know, so I think all these things sort of, yeah, it's you know, running a film festival and curating a film festival obviously has a creative role, which is why I sort of call myself artistic director, because as I said, the business side and the money side is just not really my area. So to work with people that know that stuff has been really valuable, certainly over the last 5 or 6 years, as it's sort of become a lot more sustainable.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose in that sense, I was a maker. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, for a lot of, young programs, it's quite inspiring that, you didn't go to university, you didn't have the contacts. And I think one thing that I'm always saying to so many people is you just asked at Notre Dame, you just went and asked, and often people say yes. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's changed now, but that sense of just, that's what I mean by entrepreneurial. You just think, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to just ask and see.
Yeah.
And a door's open for you. And obviously you had some luck along the way.
Yeah, I mean, trying all these different things, like being in bands, doing photography, and none of it ever being successful. Eventually you do something and something sort of sticks.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know when you give up, or when you, like they say, like, when you're acting or performing, do you ever get to a point where you stop and think, I'm not doing this anymore?
Yeah.
And I was in a similar position where it's like, well, I'm trying all these things, but certainly with the film club, it did seem a little bit in the right place at the right time because of this explosion of other film clubs and other underground film nights in London. There became a real sort of camaraderie amongst those people and that scene, and I don't think that's really existed since then. I mean, film clubs obviously still exist in London and they still crop up. There's lots of, there's stuff like, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, like Final Girls, the feminist horror collective, there's Tape Collective, they do stuff at Catford Muse. So there's all these other film clubs and film nights starting up. But I don't know, with us, I don't know, there just seemed to be, it was a bit new and we were quite young and everyone sort of connected together. Obviously, back at that time, you didn't have, there wasn't an online culture. So, obviously things have changed quite dramatically in 2010 years, in terms of the growth of digital and online cultures.
Yeah. So, I mean, that sort of story from its beginnings and very alternative and, kind of just that creativity and mixing music, eventizing things, looking at film, and then it kind of growing into this animal that now is 18 years old. So can you tell us a bit now in your job, what would your week look like as festival artistic director? Like what are the sort of jobs you do if you don't do the business side of it?
Yeah, I mean, just taking a little bit of a step back, I think we talked earlier today when we had a quick catch up. One of the reasons for the film festival existing is the open submission process. And although I talk about a lot of club nights and music and DJs and doing live visuals and all that, I think the core reason for all that stuff's fun and it's good to have that as part of the festival. But the reason the festival exists really is because we have an open submission process for people to send in their films through Film Freeway, which we've been using for the last few years, and then selecting those films and then sort of putting them into programs and then screening them. And we're getting around 5,000 films at the moment internationally, which is sort of plateaued over the last 2 or 3 years, but we'll see if talking to other festivals that grow, they also say, it gets more and more every year. So in terms of that sort of daily work for the festival, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, someone has to watch all this stuff. So who
watches it?
Well, I'm involved in watching a lot of it. I pretty much, sort of oversee the UK submissions with I work with 2 pre-selectors on viewing all the UK stuff. And then we have, international pre-selectors and international programmers. We have a separate documentary programmer. I mean, back in the early days, again, I think we talked about this earlier, I did it all. I just watched everything and made the final decision. But, certainly over the last few years, that's changed in terms of, the idea of, there being more of a discussion around the films. But viewing starts quite early on. We're not open for submission yet for next year, for 2022, but we will be very soon. And stuff starts coming in straight away. Also, as I said, I work for the BFI Festival and they have like 5,000 submissions. And again, there's 4 of us on that program. So,
It's
at
a
the
lot of
moment.
watching.
It's a lot of watching.
It's
So
a
a lot
lot
of
of
the year
watching.
is, but then there's also the other creative sides of the festival. This year we didn't do a lot of special events around the festival because, there was we didn't have the live spaces. We were doing, purely online. So we had a few curated online events, but a lot of the other parts of the festival is curating, the other stuff, the other things
Yeah.
that I mentioned earlier, like seeing what's out there in terms of
Yeah.
doing retrospectives of filmmakers, putting together special programs, working with program partners, deciding if we're going to do live events, if we're going to have live music, if we're going to do club nights, so all that sort of talked about quite early on,
Yeah.
to really start building the festival, because
Yeah.
it can take a year or more. Sometimes you have an idea for an event, you
Mm.
work with the person that you want to sort of do the focus on, and then they turn around and say, oh, they can't do it this time because they've got something else on, or they're too busy. So then you sort of start talking to them the following year to see if you can make it happen. And that's happened a few times over the last few years, where we don't have a retrospective or we don't do an event with someone because they end up not being available, but then we can carry on talking to them the next year.
Yeah.
So that daily work is, I'm not very good at
It's
doing
quite,
that whole sort of working out what you do during your day. You kind of just dive into
yeah, right.
doing emails, and that's it really.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the festival says it's looking for demonstrating formal innovation, a uniqueness of tone, and an engagement with cultural, political, and social conversations. So, first question, this question is, when you're looking at the films, at what point do you know this is a film for the festival and why? And then the second part is, when do you start putting together the selection of films and how that works as a program of short films? Because a lot of our programmers might not particularly, they might think about one short film before a feature, but a few of the groups now, and obviously that sense of programming young people's films as a festival, how do you make that program, what's the process behind putting about 10 short films together in a way that people can digest it and enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes these sort of questions are quite abstract. It's difficult to answer, what makes a good short film? How do you construct a program? And I know that's probably not what people want to hear, but I think there's an organic process to this. I don't really think it's good to put the programs together before the viewing's finished, but obviously when you've got so many films you're looking at, as you watch a film and you think it's something that could be suitable for the festival, you'd have a sort of series of set themes that the film fits, that you could sort of, I mean, if it's an easy theme, that's easy. If it's a horror film or a comedy film, it's very simple to sort of write horror comedy. But then you get more abstract themes around relationships or families or coming of age, and then you get more experimental work. I mean, we try and mix the programs up a bit. So although I've just said horror and comedy, although we do have horror and comedy programs, it is nice to maybe bring some films from the, to set a comedy sort of style film into a program that isn't so comedy heavy, to sort of mix things up a bit. And the same with experimental work. I mean, we do have a sort of experimental program, but it's really nice, certainly with the British experimental work, to bring it into other programs that may also include drama, as long as there's a sort of theme that fits. So there might be a theme around identity, and then you can show some drama-based work, but then also bring something a bit more abstract in that tackles those subjects. So you're sort of, you don't want to hit the audience with a load of films that all sort of seem quite similar. You want a bit of a varied bunch. But yeah, as I said before, I was doing all this on my own years ago. But again, I think the decision was made, and the same with the BFI Festival as well, to actually open that discussion up to other programmers, other curators, bringing in new voices, new people to discuss ideas with and to discuss program ideas with. So it becomes more of a discussion than just one person sitting there and saying, right, these are the films that are going on, that's it. I'm going to put this light on because it's getting really dark.
Yeah, you're like in a cave there. And just at that moment, if you've got a question, please start putting them up on the Q&A, not on the chat, please, but on the Q&A, because we're coming to the time to ask questions from you. So please throw them in there. Yeah, I think that's, it's interesting. It becomes more of a team decision as opposed to an individual's, and maybe how you balance that sense of, I really want this film in, and maybe have to argue your case a little bit more. Whereas if you monopolize it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, that has happened, and there have been films that I've really liked that unfortunately don't get into the sort of festival, whereas a few years ago there wouldn't have even been a discussion. And that's something that's changed in the time that I've been doing it. And I think some curators, older curators, would probably not be that happy about the fact that they're being sort of their word is being sort of spoken against. But I think with taking things forward and making the festival relevant, still you have to have those other discussions, you have to have those other voices coming in and talking about the films, and making cases for films. So I'm always open to that now.
And I think and that's supposed like linking in with activist films. So obviously short films are not the same as activist films, but I perceive there's a kind of Venn diagram crossover in some of them. And that sense, a lot of our young programmers, there's a lot of talk now about the audience and thinking about audiences, and a danger maybe of a sort of, if it's not popular, don't screen it. If it's not. And so how does that fit in the sense of, certainly with the LSFF, where you've said, it says very clearly there's a sort of, it's a platform for peripheral voices, where maybe there isn't a big audience for that kind of film. So how does that, now you've become more of a team, and there is that sense that you're BAFTA accredited, and there's a kind of officialness to you, as opposed to your origins as a alternative sort of outsiders. How do you retain that? And for those young programs who haven't seen the LSFF logo, I love the fact that it's a hand-drawn projector with a big eye and teeth. And so how do I suppose maybe you could talk a bit about how you see the festival retaining its teeth, but also having a good audience.
I mean, it's a good question, and something that, thinking back to the trajectory of the history of the festival and what I was doing before, I mean, it's interesting with the logo, just to mention that it was something that my friend Tim churned out in about 1996 when we started the film club on a piece of paper, and we ended up putting it onto flyers, and it's still with us. But it works quite well. It's a nice logo. We did go through a period of not using it, but going back to that sort of, I think, again, this is sort of a change of sort of times and the change of the way things are done. But when we started, it was kind of, I don't know, I always used to say to people when they said, how do you make a decision, how do you know what's right for the festival? And I always used to say, well, if I was going to form a band, with friends, we'd play the music that we want to play. We wouldn't really care about the audience. So I had this whole thing, this sort of anti-audience thing that like, okay, it doesn't matter if no one turns up, like, we know what we're doing is something that we like, and this is a good event, this is a good festival, this is a good film event, or if the audience want to come, then great, but if they don't, then that's their loss. I mean, I suppose that's not the best way to think when you go forward doing funding applications.
No.
But I do feel that there's also a sort of still a strong belief in that you have to do what you feel is right for you, rather than worrying too much about the audience. So I'm kind of, it's, as we said earlier, it's that balance of getting things right. You don't want to sort of put on an event by committee, but at the same time you know, you want to put on an event that's right for you and the team that you're working with, if you're all sort of working off the same page in terms
Yeah.
of what you want to present. I mean, you mentioned activist films. I mean, I suppose, yeah, certainly, again, going back to those early days, there was definitely a sort of an anti-corporate feel to a lot of those film clubs. And I mentioned Exploding Cinema earlier, and, you know, you would class them very much as an activist group. They're still going, actually. The guys that run it are still doing events. They've been doing them online, but they're all, you know, they're all a lot older now, and they're all lecturers. In fact, Duncan Reiki, who was one of the main instigators of Exploding, lives in Hastings, I do believe.
Where I live, yeah.
Yeah, so, but, you know, his back then, I remember they would, you know, I'd go to an event at the ICA where they were screening sort of Arts Council funded work, and Exploding Cinema would turn up with banners and start shouting out in the audience saying, you know, anti-funding, we hate funding, down with the Arts Council, down with the BFI. You know, and I think, you know, but those times were exciting, and, you know, you know, I think a lot of and also I think a lot of the people that were doing that sort of work then, and, you know, were very much kicking against this sort of establishment and funding thing, in a way, as some of those people are now working within those organizations. But, you know, the fact that I think they've got this sort of background of being a bit more open-minded, you know, because if
Yeah.
I'd have said in 1998 to someone at the BFI, oh, I run a film club called the Halloween Society, you know, will you come and you know, host, you know, I don't know, would you do an event with us? They'd just look at you really confused and just, why would we want to do that? Whereas I think now, you know, I've always been very open to new things that are coming through, talking to younger programmers, and, you know, you just have that openness, I think, and that probably comes from that time of when things were a bit more yeah, a little bit more sort of politically activisty kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you've said it, and a lot, you know, young programmers have really told, like, you don't just put on your favorite film, you think about audiences. But there's that you think you've said it really well, there is a balance. You've got to be passionate about the film and excited about it, and then you maybe do consult with others, because, what, you know, an event isn't an event with just yourself. So I guess you developed experience, you got some good events that just, they were popular, and therefore it gives you confidence to then keep sticking with some of your curation choices. And that confidence and experience will then lead to you being, you know, looked at by BFI and the powers that be as someone who has got a different view, but they know they're representing some a group of audience that hasn't maybe been represented yet. So there's, I mean, scope for that.
Yeah, I mean, going back to sort of starting the festival and things, obviously starting the festival as Halloween Short Film Festival, we did have that support from the ICA, which was great.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we knew who was going to come to this. Why did we even think anyone would be interested? And I think a lot of the way we promoted and designed the festival, you know, you mentioned the logo, and the logo was quite important, but we also for a festival brochure, we decided to do these fanzines that we printed and put them out across London for free. And we did that for a few years because you're trying to create something that looks kind of cool, you know, that people would be in a bar in East London and pick up this thing and go, oh, this look, you know, what's this? You know, it's a nice sort of thing to have, a nice design, and, you know, it's got some interesting, strange stuff in it. And you kind of try and create a bit of a world that, you know, people can then come into, just because, you know, people just putting on a bunch of short films and then hoping people are going to come wasn't really why would people come? You know, you've got to try and sell that event and sell that festival, sell those screenings to make it look like people have got to be there, even though they don't know what the films are. You know, they don't know anything about the filmmakers. They're all people they've never heard of. You know, you kind of try and create a buzz around the event. And I think that's definitely what was, you know, sort of key when we were starting the film club and the festival, to try and create something that people had to be at, you know, that became a bit of a cool thing. But then, of course, how do you, like any form of creativity, how do you keep that sort of going over 10, 15, 20 years? You know, as I said before, way of doing that is working with new people and bringing new people in and having new discussions.
Yeah.
Otherwise you just end up being a bit of a dinosaur.
Yeah, and you've got to keep growing. I'm so sorry we've gone over my time and we've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to start throwing some at you.
Okay.
Related to that, from an anonymous attendee, how do you balance having big name filmmakers with those who haven't produced much work before? Do you aim to screen new work in particular? So obviously back in the day, though, you weren't working with big name directors, but now maybe you do.
Yeah.
To
I mean,
draw.
I don't know.
Tell us a bit about that.
But I think it's to do with the work. We obviously, when we curate the new films that come in, we're not going to choose a filmmaker because they're well known or they've got famous actors in their films. It's all about choosing the best work. But you know, we did have some big names in the festival this year, and I suppose those films can be sold through our PR and marketing. That we have got films with Daniel Kaluuya and Riz Ahmed and Esme Creed Miles. You know, they're all sort of things you can sell, but hopefully people will pick up on that, and then that will give them access to watching stuff that they might not have heard of, you know, because those films are quite sort of rare. You know, the 210, 220 that we showed in the festival this year, you know, the ones I mentioned is like, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 that may have some big names in. I mean, the nature of short film is that it tends to be younger, new filmmakers, students. Obviously, as I've just mentioned, you do have those bigger names that come through, but a lot of the time you're totally working with new young filmmakers who are unknown or unknown filmmakers. And it's nice to watch those careers, because obviously, having done this for a while, there are quite a lot of filmmakers that have come through the festival, and hopefully you can build a relationship with those. So, you know, we've always sort of worked quite closely with Peter Strickland, who did In Fabric and Barbarian Sound Studio, with you know, the first ever festival we did, Andrea Arnold won an award for her film Wasp. In fact, I think it was the first film the first award she won for that film, which she then got an Oscar for. You know, and there's other names that have come up through the festival that are still, you know, sort of making work. You know, even in the last year, you've had some great features out by filmmakers whose work was shown, like Calm with Horses, the Nick Rowland film, Makeup, the Claire Oakley film. You know, so yeah, I think they're not names when you start showing their work, but they become names.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some young programmers might think like a double bill. You know, you've got a mainstream feature, but then you might put in something unknown, or the other way around. You might have something that's really like a great short that might complement a really unknown alternative film. So I suppose there's a bit of that in the mix. And you've said that really it's the quality of the film. There's a question here from Ankit Bakshi. She says, or he says, in case of activist films and a film which is showing something different, if both the films are good, how do you choose which to show? I mean, I guess I think you've kind of answered it, but maybe you can elaborate.
I mean, again, it's going back to that sort of, you know, looking at what we've got, looking at the type of films we've got, and you know, looking at what, I mean, you know, again, going back to this word activist, you know, we do have a documentary program. We had 4 documentary programs this year, and Miranda, who's our documentary programmer, is very keen to sort of highlight issues within some of the work that she programs. If you look through the sort of style of the type of work that she put together, you'll see a really good mix of. I mean, you know, I don't get to see a lot of the films now that get programmed, but this year was really good because it did mean I could watch the documentary programs because I'm just sitting in my flat. You know, you say, you know, earlier on, you must be sort of shattered, but to be honest, most of the work was done for the festival before we started it. So, you know, this year it was literally sitting down and just watching the festival as an audience member. You know, we had some live events as well and Q&As, but it was certainly a good process for me to see all these programs, which I never really get a chance to do at the festival because we're rushing around, you know.
Yeah, there's a really difficult question here, and if you want to just think about it, but it's from Lottie Jeps. What are your 3 favourite short films of all time? If you want to think about it on the background, but that's, you know, that would say something about, it's maybe too hard a question.
I mean, I know I put some films together for this seminar, which we that I think some people may have watched them. I mean, there's some good ones there, but I mean, going back to sort of when I think the film that always stays with me was one of the first films I saw when I was programming. Funnily enough, he's another Hastings filmmaker. I remember when I first got the job at the British Council and I saw this film by Andrew Cotting called Smart Alec.
Yes.
And it's interesting because it's not really that sort of typical of his work, but that really blew me away as something I'd not really seen before. But back then it was like short film was all new to me. I hadn't really experienced short film. So, you know, and he's a filmmaker that, you know, we literally showed that film at the first ever Halloween Society. We had him in the festival this year doing a Q&A with Ben Rivers. So he's been on the journey with the festival since it started. And before that, you know, he's a great filmmaker. He had a feature out last year, Whaleburn Box. He's working on another feature. And for someone like him, who's much more from an artist sort of background, it's really nice to sort of have that crossover with those kind of filmmakers.
Yeah. Yeah, so we might come back to the other two. That's really great. Thank you. Okay, another question here. We've got great talk. We are a young festival. This is from Andy Carslaw. We're a young festival and I'm taking on most roles, including pretty much leading the programming and driving things. It seems online festivals are now here to stay, and I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts or strategies for this moving forward. How it's changing the landscape and the content also.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it came out of the blue a bit this year, last year with what was happening. You know, certainly when they announced the lockdown in March last year, we had a sort of emergency meeting. And I think one of the things that was definitely in the air was that maybe we wouldn't be able to do a festival in January. I was very sort of kicking against that and going, no, I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. But I think, you know, as the year went on, it was pretty clear that we'd have to do some sort of online element to the festival. And then as the year went on, it was like, and we made the decision very early on to make sure it happened. But the idea would be that it would go online, you know, 100%, everything would be online. And then we had this option of maybe doing some screenings as well, which ultimately didn't happen. But although it wasn't, I mean, I don't want to be negative, but it you know, obviously sitting in my flat watching it, it wasn't fun for me particularly. You know, and the idea of being online, but to sort of contradict that a bit, what was exciting was to get the festival out there. So in terms of accessibility and in terms of people watching the films that wouldn't maybe come to the festival for whatever reason, to do with travel or accessibility, that was amazing to have that sort of catchment to really get the work out as wide as possible. I don't know what the figures are for the festival yet. We'll have a meeting next week because we've only just finished, but we also made the films, many of the films internationally available as well. So to go forward, I think we'll probably do it like this every year. I mean, I can't see why we wouldn't, because it was so exciting to have that way to have this sort of platform to present the festival. Of course, I don't want to be stuck in my flat next year watching films on my own. So we would also present the festival in the physical way as well. So I think a lot of festivals are thinking about this now. They've made this move because it's something that people have been talking about for years, the online space and how festivals should be engaging more. And a lot of them were very against it. We had no online presence before this. We had a website. We were good at social media. And, you know, social media had grown as the festival grew, because, you know, being 18 years old as a festival in that time, Twitter started, Facebook started. So we jumped on all that stuff quite early. So we had good digital engagement that way. But in terms of an actual event, a festival, we had zero engagement online. So to sort of switch to move everything online was quite a challenge. It was successful the way it's been for other festivals, and it was also, you know, as I just said, I think it would be something we'd be looking to continue to do every year, because, you know, to make the festival that accessible, but then obviously have the public screening events as well alongside that, so you kind of have a hybrid, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that context, we've got someone from the Czech Republic saying, how do you bring attention to short films? After all, the investors and sponsors tend to support feature film rather than short one. And lots of people think that short films are less valuable. And says, at least in my country, Czech Republic. And there's another question there about from, I haven't got the name. Is there a sort of stigma about short film and its connection with non-narrative genre?
Well, in terms of how, sorry, the first question was more about how do you get the sponsorship?
Yeah, so how do you get the sponsorship? And then within that, is there a stigma?
I mean, it's creating the sort of, to get people excited about the festival, it's creating this idea of the festival of being something that people have to be at. It doesn't matter that there's no big names, but if you can create a real buzz, then you're creating an audience, and that's what sponsors are interested in. Obviously, they're also interested in names as well, so you can throw those big names in that I mentioned earlier, like, you know, the Riz Ahmed film, and that's always good to have that, but you know, it's not the main reason for the festival existing. It's about creating something that filmmakers and audiences want to be part of, and that's what sponsors get excited about, because they want to be seen to be partnering with something that's kind of cool and interesting and exciting and new. But obviously, as I said just now, keeping that going year after year can be quite a challenge. And what was the second question? The stigma?
Oh, it was related, yeah. Is there a stigma?
I don't think. I mean, interesting with UK compared to other festivals, other filmmakers and other film making in other countries. I mean, in this country, you know, people just go out and make a short film. There's a lot of low budget filmmakers that maybe you wouldn't get in France or Germany. People just, you know, in terms of the amount of UK shorts we get, you know, we're getting 3,000 or so UK short films, which is a lot of, I mean, I don't know. I mean, these are films, obviously we do get film school films, we get some funded, the films that aren't, you know, BFI Network and Channel 4 films, but a lot of the films we get are just sort of low budget, self-funded, low budget, no budget, you know, and we're open to all that stuff. We have those kind of programs in the festival. We do a whole low budget strand. You know, these are people that might have shot something in a couple of hours on their phone in an afternoon, you know, and I think that's sort of what's exciting about the festival, to have all that kind of work, all that style, all those styles.
Yeah, great. So we've got another question about really how you balance your work. So as a young programmer, how do you manage your work and manage your living too? So I'm sharing some lookalike career route with you, sort of not completing education, doing something that people are not aware about, not something which has regular earning and all of that. So yeah, how do you balance it? So if you, obviously now you're getting the funding, but maybe in the early days, how did you balance that?
It's a really good question, and it's something that I think should be talked about a bit more, and I'm going to use that word privilege. I mean, you know, we do live in a very, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's, so no, I never earned any money for the first few years, you know, but I knew I was lucky. I was born in London. I lived in London. I mean, my parents are not, have no, you know, you mentioned earlier about having connections, and, you know, I know so many filmmakers that have gone through connections and gone through family members, but, you know, my family are a working class family who had a building business in southeast London, you know, and I ended up basically staying in the house that I was born in. You know, I had my own flat in that house, so I knew I was in that lucky position of not having those London rents. You know, my parents were supportive in that sense, that they, you know, wanted me to do, you know, they'd done their own thing, starting their business, probably when it was a lot easier to start businesses back in the, you know, so yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, it sounds awful, but I don't think the festival would exist if it wasn't for my parents, because, you know, there's just no way for those early years I could have survived in London. And it's even more difficult now, you know, it's even harder now. So although I didn't have the connections to do these things, and I just went and did that, you know, because it was stuff I was interested in, and trying to build up your own career, I did have the fallback of not, you know, I mean, I obviously had temp jobs. I worked at the British Council. I worked at an oil company for years. You know, yeah. So it's kind of, yeah. I'm not from, you know, I'm just from a family living in southeast London in Lewisham.
Yeah.
But you know, luckily I've had that fallback of having, you know, that sort of support from my family of doing what I want to do. You know, but yeah, it is a hard one when there is very little support to do this stuff and to make this stuff and to create these events and to do, and it's even harder now. You know, we know it's harder now with what's been happening in the last year and the last few years with Brexit as well.
Yeah.
But you know, and yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just, you know, this is what I felt. You know, I've got this chance of being able to do this and to sort of really develop this, and it's working, and we're getting audiences. So I'm just going to keep at it and just sort of, you know, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great what you've said. In a way, you know, you have privilege, but you also have to kind of keep going. And there is that sense, obviously, it didn't happen overnight. There wasn't overnight success. And you had that sort of passion and commitment to keep going. Yeah, it's really tough. All the young programs out there, it's a whole different world, like 20 years ago, you know, but equally that asking, you know, what's the Woody Allen quote, you know, 95% of success is showing up. And I think there's also like, there's a lot of success just asking sometimes. And certainly getting into a young program and getting in that way and showing initiative and doing the work. You've got a really good temp job at the British Council. So it might also be, you know, you've got to pay the bills by getting a temp job, but maybe try and get a temp job that skirts around the thing that you're looking to get contacts with.
I mean, that was only luck, because I was in British Council for a bit in their accounts department, just doing admin work, and before that I'd been in an oil company. But those temp jobs were really, I mean, even in the oil company, that's where I met the guy that I was temping with, was in this band, and I ended up doing all this visual stuff for his band, and they ended up becoming quite successful in the mid-90s. And you know, so those
it turns up in unexpected
really,
places.
Those jobs are really good at meeting like-minded people. I don't know if it's the same now in temp work, but a lot of the people that were temping at the time will want to be bands, want to be filmmakers, want to be musicians, but they were all sort of, you know, that's where you could meet some really interesting people.
I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple of quick questions. One from Eugenie. Hi, Philip. Thank you for sharing insight into your work. I was wondering if gender balance and diversity behind the camera are aspects that are actively considered during the selection process
I mean, I touched on this a little bit earlier, because as I said, you know, starting out, I was just choosing everything, making those final decisions. But certainly, you know, as you know, the things have developed, and the way of festivals programming has developed, the way of organizing, you know, the way things have gone forward, I think it's very much about, you know, the balance of who's programming the films, who's selecting the films. Are we showing, you know, is there a good balance across each program in terms of gender and you know, a diverse filmmaking? I mean, I suppose it's that, again, it's getting that balance of, like, you don't want to start programming films to make up quotas, but you also don't want to, you want to show as much diverse work as possible. So again, that's why, you know, it's good to talk to other people that may have some other thoughts on some of the films that are coming through, and, you know, should we be screening this? Is this a good film? You know, can you talk to me a bit about this film? You know, so, and then we can make a decision whether we show it or not. So I think, it's a big part of curating, and the part of putting the festival together, a really big part. But also trying to create something that also feels true to the festival and true to, you know, you as a curator and the other people you work with as curators.
Thank you. I'm going to fit one last question in, which is, do you have any advice for young filmmakers looking to enter their films into your festival?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, just enter. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, you know, my films aren't very good. I wouldn't really want to enter a festival like yours because it wouldn't get in. It's like, well, we don't know that until you enter. You know, that's the whole point. We're looking for new, exciting filmmakers. And obviously, yeah, we do get 5,000 films and we select about 200, which is still a reasonable amount of films compared to something like the LFF, which, you know, I didn't talk about the figures for that, but that's about 5,000 submissions, and this year we only selected 30. I think it's usually 80 because it moved online. They made a limit of how many we could select. But you want to see new work by people you haven't, you know, heard of before that are kind of coming through. So I don't think there's any, just enter really, just take the chance and see.
Yeah.
You know, that's the only way
Yeah.
forward really. Don't hold off, you know.
Just do it. Just ask, be pushy, ask, and, you know, enter the film. I think that's a great place to end. I'm so sorry that we've run out of time, and apologies to those people who've put a question out. I'm sure if you sent that question in to myself or Philip or at the Film Hub Southeast email, we could get them answered for you. But we've run out of time. Thank you so much, Philip. It's been fascinating and really kind of energizing to hear you talk about the scene and how you can move from alternative to institution, but keep your teeth as well. So thanks so much for that. And just to remind everyone that if you haven't already, Philip has recommended 5 short films that are Yeah, Yeah, Yeah by Michael Forres, Beat by Anil Karia, Kids Might Fly by Alex Taylor, Tight Jeans by Destiny Ekargaria, and finally the one he's already mentioned, The Long Goodbye by Anil. Oh, I've done the name. Give me the name. I've typed it wrong.
Oh, no, it's Anil Karia.
Oh, it is Anil Karia again.
Yeah, so he's a filmmaker that we've been showing his work for years, and Beat,
yeah.
I love his first. I don't know if it was his first short, but yeah, he did the film with Riz Ahmed last year, The Long Goodbye, which is a great film.
Yeah. So if you get a chance, check them out and discuss them. Some amazing selections there. We didn't get the other 2 of your all-time short films, but I think that, you know, that's maybe too hard a question. And just to remind everyone that next month our session will be on women in film with Joe Duncan. And it'll be February the 25th at 4:30. So check out that. We're following up one of those questions. And good luck with your short film programs, making and programming. Thanks so much for coming.
Cheers.
See you next month.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.